how to sort of measure the benefit of threat hunting. So for once to, well, show improvement in the security posture, but also to justify budgets and so on. And that is something I think that could be a vendor-specific topic. Do you have any ideas how to do that? I mean, I have an idea of how we do it, but I would be interested in how you could support that. I think it might help to go from the top to bottom. So Chris, could you start, please?
Sure. Matthias, can you repeat the question again?
When you measure the performance of threat hunting, right? So you said you support threat hunting in a way, but would that also include some ways to figure out how beneficial it was?
Measuring performance for it. I mean, I think that knowing how something like proactive threat hunting, it's hard to put a quantifiable number on it unless you're really basing it on sort of the average cost of a breach or average cost of IR when it comes to, looking at an aggregate, I think. So you could sort of justify it by saying, hey, well, this is what average breaches cost. This is what average IR costs. This is something that we can sort of help offset with an effective threat hunting program. Beyond that, I think it really is sort of, it's part of sort of a mature cybersecurity posture. So I think it is something that is, for large, maybe larger organizations that are a global organization, it is something that sort of, I think it's almost table stakes to be able to have at least, if it's not, in-house people that are doing threat hunting, at least having a vendor that you might trust to do that threat hunting capability to sort of augment your existing security posture. I wish I had a better, sort of way to quantify it, but I really think it is sort of measuring against what's out there and sort of showing either, CISO level, board level, this is something we want to avoid, so that we, if you are doing proactive threat hunting, this is something, we can avoid being that headline. We can avoid, sort of having to, fall, whether maybe in the EU, falling into the GDPR fine, into those GDPR fines and things like that. So I think it's sort of like showing the worst case scenario and saying, this is what we're avoiding by doing this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And it's to be honest, when we go through the surveys also over the last few years, that's where organizations struggle the most, because on one hand it costs money, that's for sure, but it's sometimes hard to justify. There are ways, and some, well, I would say very good ways, that the respondents mentioned over the years, and I can get to that later. But I was just interested in if there is like some sort of dashboard that you could help like the threat hunting managers out with. Jamie, what's your take on that? Just
apologies that you broke up a bit there. My sound was out.
Oh, sorry. Do you have any take on like how to justify spending money for threat hunting?
Yeah, it's really tricky. So when I go in and speak to customers who are starting the threat hunting journey, they ask very similar questions. And a lot of the time, it's about how do you measure success? And does success look different for a mature threat hunting organization compared to an organization who's just getting started and maybe their people aren't very skilled? And the reality is, of course, the answer to that is yes. If I've got a team of newbies, no offense to anybody who's new, who's just learning how to threat hunt and is just learning how to dive into volatility memory dumps or search the registry or open packets with Wireshark and understand what's going on, their learning is going to get in the way of being successful. And it's on a curve, and the curve goes like this, and then it plateaus out, and they suddenly start getting better at what they're doing. And this is the same for all of us. We all learn in a fashion that requires small amounts of success, incrementally growing to get better at what we do. So the reality is, when you first start out, you're not going to be very successful. So your success criteria should be quite low. It should be, have I found anything at all that I can go back and talk to the board about and say, look, we found something, this is great. And we correlate and corroborate our findings with something else. And corroboration is really important to make sure that what you're looking at isn't, for example, a false positive. So I found something interesting. If I go and look on the internet, have other people found the same thing? If they have, great, I'm learning, I'm getting better. It's more likely to be a real issue. And then as you build your skill sets over time, you start getting more and more focused on, okay, these are the threats that are likely to impact the business. These are the resources that we have to try and find those threats. And these are the parts of our organization that are risk impaired by these threats. We're going to focus our efforts on there. We're better at our job than we were a year ago. And we can be more clear to the board when we go back and talk about the risk impact of the threats we are trying to identify, and have we been successful in identifying them and finding them? And if we haven't found them in our network, is that because actually our compensating controls are very good and we're keeping the bad guys out, or have we slipped back in our skills and do we need to refresh our fundamentals? That's just my view on it.
Okay, so that's very focused on the content of threat hunting and the direct output, right? Rather than the indirect one.
Absolutely.
Okay, great, got you. Andrew, I mean, looking into the endpoint perspective now, automation perspective.
Yeah, I talked a little bit about how some of the ways that an organization could measure that. And Matthias and Josh, you gave us the really interesting point as you're building these surveys for SANS through the years. One of the things that you want to do is be able to compare results across the years. So I do come to the conclusion of using some kind of measuring system that is defined by a third party. And obviously there's a lot of talk about MITRE. It is a useful framework. I think for an organization that's just starting to try and understand even how to build those metrics, I think the attack framework is a good place to start, with that view of let's understand the bulk of detections across the whole spectrum. Mm-hmm. And as just mentioned, what can we do that are compensating controls that have a sufficiently low false positive rate? And then how do we shift that detection from, it's really easy to build rules that say if a young process on a system looks like it reads a file and then writes the file back and renames it, that sounds concerning. How do we move some of that much further left? And I think that would be a really interesting place for an organization to start.
That's actually something that a lot of organizations actually do. Because with MITRE, you do have the ability to put your SOC capabilities and which are reactive, right, and your threat hunting activities which are proactive into one common pool. And eventually, when you master something in the threat hunting part, you just move it over to the SOC if it's possible. So this is a very good integrated view, and I know as a fact that quite a few organizations are using something like that. Also vendors, by the way. So John, anything from your side?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
I think, no, I think the points I would have made have already been made by the other speakers. And I did jump in on the chat as well earlier on the Q&A to answer a question regarding measurement. But yeah, no, let's give time to other questions as well.
Okay, just one thing that helps organizations to justify, the expenses coming with threat hunting is some side effects that you have. And we mentioned that in the talk, in our part of the talk as well. So one of the things is you can get down false positives, and that translates directly into money when it comes to SOC. And the second thing is you can establish visibility and you can check out tools. So if a tool is not good in detecting things in a threat hunting operation where you focus around what you want to detect, then it's probably also not good in a SOC context, because the SOC will not detect it either, right? So give you a little example. So for example, if you're looking into something, a detection rule, because you know an attacker group uses a certain registry key for something, and that certain registry key happens to be in the user branch of the registry. So the current user branch of a certain user, then many EDR products probably won't even detect it because not all of them cover that. And this is something that a SOC does not necessarily realize at the right time. It just put in a rule to detect that, but all of a sudden they realized they couldn't even see that at this point. So those things can definitely help to justify the threat hunting effort, especially if you bind them to the SOC success, because I mean, in the end, they're all going after the same kind of success when it comes to protecting a company. So this is just something that when we were asking around a little bit, that other organizations came up with. And I think you can use that SOC kind of perspective to justify a lot of expenditures here. So we got quite a few questions that were put in here. One is in general how packet analysis can help threat hunting, and especially, and that's good that we have 3 vendors on the network side, especially now that 90% of the traffic, so that's quote from the question, is TLS or in any other form encrypted. So what is it you're looking at? You should probably start from the other side now. So John.
Yeah, I'll take a crack at that. So I think, you saw some screenshots. I think it was my colleague at maybe ExtraHop that was showing you some packet analysis screenshots. I think our perspective and what I hear from customers on packet analysis with regards to threat hunting utility is kind of twofold. One, definitely useful, right? There's definitely a role for packet-based analysis in the world of threat hunting on the network side, especially, right? There's some level of payload depth that you may need to go to that abstract layer of, layer 7 logging of the network won't necessarily capture. So just out of the gate, yes, there is a role for packet-based analysis. I think the challenge, the second point is the challenge, right? There's the encryption challenge, which was brought up in the Q&A. I think my perspective there is, decrypt where you can, and where you can't, there's still, useful information, observable information in encrypted traffic that you can actually instrument in threat hunting, right? The protocols themselves, while they may be encrypted, still have observable elements that may be useful context. It's not going to provide payload information, but it's useful context. And then there's also, if you get clever, some behavioral kind of insights you can derive from encrypted traffic analysis by looking at payload size and timing and sequencing and contextual information that can provide additional analysis. So it's not a total curtain closed black box necessarily. Decrypt where you can and where you can't. There's actually still a lot of light, I think, to be squeezed. Lastly on the packet analysis front, and then I'll turn it over to a colleague. I think one of the challenges we hear too is traditional full packet capture is kind of like everything, right? I actually started my career being trained on Wireshark of all things, and it provides very deep visibility, but in a very traditionally limited historical window, which is to say you can only go back in time on your network a few hours, a few days. And as a threat hunter, sometimes you're going to need to go back in time on your network weeks or months, right? Especially if you're dealing with a sophisticated actor and a very complex threat. And thinking about how you can capture packets in a more flexible manner, like alert-based triggers, et cetera, can help you kind of dial down that volume of data and make the packets you're using a lot more discoverable and accessible in your hunt.
Okay, so cool. Thank you very much. So just to get some sort of order, Chris, can you do that? And then next round we start with Jamie.
Oh, I would go ahead and defer. I'm sorry. Maybe to Jamie, I think.
Okay.
Just
Sure,
I was answering one of the questions on the Q&A. I'm sorry, on the.
Oh no, that's good
chat.
because if we can clean that up, that's also good because then all questions are answered. So I'm just picking the most prevalent ones, right? That we got more than once. Jamie?
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah. It works now. It works now.
I can pick that up as well. So look, I agree almost entirely with what John said about packet analysis. There's a couple of things to take into account from that question. The first thing is, unless you absolutely need to keep packets for forensic reasons or compliance reasons, if you can extract all of the useful information out of packets and store that in a transactional record store and a metric store for things like bytes sent and received and things like that, then you shouldn't need to keep packets. unless you like buying lots and lots of hard disks, which, you know, if you buy things from EMC, they will love you, you know, things like that. It's not necessary nowadays for products like NDR to keep packets. And in actual fact, full packet capture has its uses, but targeted packet capture, or what we call precision PCAP, where a packet capture is initiated off of the back of a detection, then that can give you a much easier answer to that story. And John was absolutely right that in actual fact, when you look at things like threat hunting and compare threat hunting to incident response is usually dealing with now. It's dealing with things that are maybe a week old at most. And you can keep packets for a week, that's no big deal. But if you need to do threat hunting, you might be going back 3 months, maybe 6 months in some cases. And in those cases, full packet capture can become onerously expensive. And not only that, but going through packets for that amount of time, nightmare, you don't want to do it. So the best idea really is to pull all of the useful data out of those packets and store it in a transactional record store in something like Google BigQuery, where ML can search it and humans can search it. And that's our approach. That's the way we do things. On the encryption side, John again has the right idea, decrypt where you can. But I would also point out the fact that there's a certain amount of, well, I think the question in chat said about TLS. Decrypting TLS can be a bit of a problem. Well, it's not just TLS though. There are other protocols on your networks that are encrypted that you need to be concerned about. SMBv3, WinRM, MSRPC, the protocols that lateral movement hides in. And decrypting TLS isn't going to help you there because that's, you know, an entirely different protocol. So in actual fact, what you want to be able to do is decrypt all of the useful protocols. And remember things like man-in-the-middle decryption, like we used to do with blue coat proxies and things like that. TLS 1.3 breaks that. You can't do that anymore. So that's another potential limiting factor. So the answer is that you want to provide a decryption capability or have a decryption capability that can do SSL and TLS, and you don't want to do it man-in-the-middle anymore. So you want an appliance or you want an agent on your critical assets that will grab the ephemeral keys from TLS 1.3 for you. And you want to be able to decrypt those Microsoft protocols. And as the extra hop marketing manager here, I have to put my hand in the air and say, I've just said all of that, knowing full well we can do all that. So maybe a little bit cheeky, but there you are. We can do that. It's useful to be able to do that. Encrypted traffic analysis, we do that as well, because you know what? It's good at doing quite a few things. And the good thing about encrypted traffic analysis and looking at things like JA3 certs and other types of certificate and traffic analysis is it can give you good insights into what's going on. But decryption drives conclusions, not insights. And if you can do that, it's a better story. But if you can't do it, the best thing still is decrypt where possible and encrypted traffic analysis where you can't.
I have a follow-up question. Do you think it's easier to hide on an endpoint or on the network?
It's easier to hide on the network simply due to the scale of the network. If you're in an organization that has 100,000 users, which all have 2 or 3 devices, and they have multiple geographies around the world, and maybe some of their devices are PCs or VoIP phones, or maybe you're in a healthcare organization and they have MRI scanners using esoteric protocols like HL7, which most organizations don't even take a look at. We do. If you are able to hide in the noise, and remember that with Microsoft networks in particular, most of the protocols as a default give you cover because they're encrypted, then it's a great place to be an attacker. But that's where you use good NDR to open up those things, get visibility of the entire environment, look at as many protocols as you can, because the bad guys aren't just going to stick to hiding inside the common protocols. You want as much visibility and observability of that environment as you can. I'd say it's easier to hide in a network than an endpoint.
They might hide in a common protocol and just add their own protocol layer on top of that, but yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
But I think that's a good lead over to Andrew here. So Andrew, when you do threat hunting, and you probably use both because you mentioned you have both capabilities, are you using rather network or endpoint as primary source and the other one on the same level, or rather as an enrichment source? So what is your strategy on that?
It's typically that we treat both of those things as potentially equal sources of interesting telemetry, and everyone else has hit the nail on the head. I think that your endpoint visibility, your classic EDR visibility, it most often is only as good as your ability to push an agent to those systems. So we strongly believe as well that being able to bring in that network data and use that as a principal source of investigations will help you with all of those places that you haven't been able to install your agent. We talked about IOC devices, MRI scanners that might, let's not consider what operating system some of those devices are still running, right the way to systems that just got missed in your EDR deployment. So we think both of those things are really important. And from the Sophos perspective, to put my virtual Sophos hat on, the way that we handle those is our friend ML and AI to run across both of those sources, perform some correlation and prioritization for both our customers and our own SOC.
Just reminded me of a case where a heart catheter lab was breached, and you went in there and said, "Oh, where's the computer? What is the computer here? It's just big, big machine."
Yeah.
I got a question that might sound a little bit stupid, but I think I heard at least 3 presentations. One of the reasons to go for the network is because you can never be sure to cover all machines, right? Because for some operating systems, there might not be an agent. For some appliances, you might not have access privileges at all. You can't install anything. How do you make sure that the whole network is covered? You know, also the modem that someone on some remote island has under the desk. How do you make sure that that is covered? Who wants to answer first? Last question here, I think, from a time perspective.
I'll happily pick that up. Look, so here's the thing. You need both. You need EDR and you need NDR, because NDR is going to protect your core networks. But what happens when that laptop goes out and is used in an airport lounge or used in a hotel? You're just not going to see it. So you need both technologies, and both technologies cover each other's back. And that's the key thing. As an example, within our product ExtraHop, we have the ability to speak to numerous endpoint agents. I think we're speaking to Sophos at the moment to be able to do with those guys as well soon. And one of the features that we have is you can tell when an EDR agent attempts to speak to its cloud hosting service. And you can tell what assets on the network are Windows and Macs and things like that that should be running an EDR. So you can tell which devices are checking in to the EDR service and which ones aren't. And you can very easily produce a report that says, here's your coverage of EDR across your suitable covered estate. You are missing EDR on 5% of your devices, and here they are. So the tools work together to give you the coverage.
I think that's the best point. You can never have enough visibility for threat hunting. I think that's a good closing statement.